You are listening to the Air Raid Hour with host Judge Mathis, dog, Tilt Money, dog, presented by the fine folks over at the Cover One Sports Network, dogs. Bills Mafia, let's go!
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour presented by Cover One Sports Network and Picasso's Pizza. We are here on a unfortunate Monday. It's usually we like to do these things on Victory Mondays, but today is not the case. Tonight, I will be your host tonight, David Tilton at Tilt Money on Twitter, and I'm joined tonight by special co-host Ryan Sullivan at Sports Rock 2 on Twitter. One of the most articulate and thoughtful tweeters out there. If you're not following Ryan on Twitter, please give him a follow. Bills, really good Bills takes, some good food takes. I
Very good food takes.
I agree with some. I don't agree with others, but this is what it is. So it creates great conversation. And Ryan knows his stuff when it comes to the Bills. For those of you who only watch us on YouTube, probably recall we go way back, even going back to the Fanatics days of doing these shows together. So Ryan's a good dude, and you should follow him on social media. He's way more active than I am, and he'll be joining me in the co-pilot seat tonight to talk Bills. Unfortunately, fall to the Jets yesterday, 20-17, and we're going to get into all of that. But obviously, the news of the day today, which we're going to start off with, is focused on this Josh Allen elbow gate, or whatever you want to call it. It seems to be some conflicting reports out of there from some high profile reporting. You have people out there like Chris Mortensen saying that there's not a lot of panic. You have others out there reporting that could be a significant injury to Josh's elbow. We heard from Sean McDermott today that said they're still evaluating him and that they'd have more news likely for us come Wednesday. And that it would take a hell of a lot to keep Josh Allen out of any future games. But Ryan, first and foremost, how are you feeling tonight after this game yesterday? And what was it like kind of trudging through the landscape of social media today? Because I know you're pretty active out there.
Well, first of all, this was a really weird game for me to experience. So I was at a wedding yesterday during the game. One of my fiance was in a wedding during the Bills game. So I had to go and catch up on the game all after. So I had to go back, watch the game at like 6:00 yesterday, catch up through Twitter. And so that was an experience in and of itself. But I think I've always been, I realize my blind spot is being a Bills optimist. And I can go back and find, if I was looking through Facebook posts today, I've always been a Bills optimist. But I try to really fight back against the sky is falling stuff. And I know we say that as we're about to discuss Josh Allen's elbow here, which is potentially super problematic if some of those reports are true. But, it's not a bad spot to be in when you just had an ugly game and you're still 6-2 in the driver's seat for the conference and, 0-2 and 0-2 in the division, but still in the driver's seat for the division. So I try to be an optimist through a lot of the sky is falling on all that stuff, but I still feel pretty okay about the long-term outlet of this team.
Yeah, it is. They talk about the NFL being week to week, right? And I think our reactions are oftentimes week to week as well. Like the fans ebb and flow, the fan reactions and the fan takes and the fan analysis and just like analysis in general. And it's not even just fan, like it's people who are paid to analyze football do the same thing, and they fall victim to the same things that we all do. And that is having week to week reactions, and overreactions to a game that we know is week to week. We talk about how crazy the NFL is and what makes it the best, and why I think it's better than college football is like you can have a team like the Indianapolis Colts beat the Kansas City Chiefs a couple weeks back, and now we're talking about a few weeks later, on November 7th, we're halfway through the season, and the Colts are firing their head coach. So,
well, look at the Titans. Look at the Titans. The Bills built the Titans in 3 quarters with Ryan Tannehill in at quarterback. The Titans had someone in quarterback who they did not trust to throw a football, and they had him in a blender for almost an entire game outside of one drive. Like I think we forget how random football can be sometimes.
Completely random. And there's some truth to this comment here from RJ Melville. The issue isn't even really the loss. The issue is the insane amount of injuries, all at key positions. This year doesn't seem like our year. All the bad luck and bad calls, and for the law of averages, right? And for a game with a ton of variance and randomness and all this stuff, like the law of averages seems to be catching up with the Bills on the injury front, at least in the past 3 to 4 years. The Bills have really been pretty fortunate in avoiding major injuries to significant contributors outside of obviously Trey White getting hurt in the Thanksgiving game last year, and Milano missing some extended time, not super extended time to where he's missed the whole season, but extended time with some soft tissue injuries in the past, games here and there. The Bills have been relatively a healthy team for the better part of really Sean McDermott's tenure here as the head coach. And it does seem like this year there's a significant amount of more injuries to key personnel on this Bills team. And I know that there's other teams and other fan bases are going to say, like, we go through this too, but like, again, the ebbs and flows of the NFL, like this is a year where the Bills are just kind of facing that type of injury luck. And it's not even a situation where you can point to it and say, like, oh, well, they have injury prone guys or anything like that, right? It's like, it's a lot of it is just injuries that happen during the course of the game. And a lot of it is luck when it comes to injuries in football, as we know. So what's your thoughts on that before we kind of get to Josh Allen's injury here and just generally the Bills and sort of the injuries they've faced throughout this season and the adversity they faced, on the injury report where it's been lengthy at times?
I don't think you could have said it better, right? I think we had there was this feeling, I think, or this narrative among Bills fans and even in the national media that because the Bills have this super fancy health and fitness or health and wellness center, that we were especially skilled at avoiding injuries. In reality, yeah, I mean, football has the saying is football has a 100% injury rate. Everyone at some point outside of maybe Joe Thomas is going to miss it's going to miss games, is going to miss snaps, is going to miss weeks. And Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde for 4 years, I think, missed 2 games between them. That is an absurd number, especially with the position that they play and the physicality that they play with. There was bound to be a time where something happens, and it sucks that, it was a neck injury. That's not something that, that it's not a hamstring. That's a freak thing that happens. Jordan Poyer's elbow, you saw, what happened on that tackle. Freak thing. It's not like he didn't stretch. It's not like they're not prepared. That stuff just happens. It's I think the term's acute injury, where something just kind of happens on a play and you get injured from it, a sprain, a strain, stuff like that. You cannot predict it. You really cannot predict injuries, and it sucks. You look at the Ravens last year where they lost, more players to injuries than anyone. There really is no predicting that. There's no predicting this stuff. As much as we think that we can, as much as we think that this health and fitness center that players love and obviously has had some impact over the years, it doesn't stop the inevitable.
And Astro here says injury's a bad excuse. We had a chance to win yesterday, didn't, because Allen had a bad game. We're going to get to that in one of our later segments. But wrapping up the injury talk, there was an update from Sean McDermott, vague update on Matt Milano. Said he's improving. Jordan Poyer, he said he's improving. Trey White, he said he's improving. Pretty vague there. It does look like Gregory Rousseau is going to be week to week with what appears to be a high ankle sprain. And then obviously we're waiting as patiently as we can for some more updates on Josh Allen's elbow, which maybe we will get by Wednesday. And we will see by Wednesday, when it comes to that first practice report, what is going to be the case and sort of the outlook for Josh Allen for this upcoming Vikings game. But before we kind of move to that, we obviously want to talk a little bit about this Jets game yesterday. And before we do, I do have to mention, of course, as always, we are brought to you here on the Air Raid Hour by Picasso's Pizza. 4 great locations in Williamsville, West Seneca, Lancaster, and Blaisdell. Buffalo Pizza since 1980. You get that hand-cut cup and char pepperoni that we all love. You can order online at picassospizza.net. And if you're an out-of-towner like myself, like Judge, get it mailed to your home. I've ordered some for some games for the draft. It's just as good of an experience as getting it fresh from the restaurant. You feel at home. For us out-of-towners like Judge and myself, Ryan is fortunately able to get it locally. So we all have our ways to get picassospizza.net. So Ryan, we want to lead the show off before we kind of get into the different segments and kind of reflecting on this game about now throwing the Josh Allen news into the mix with the elbow injury and seeing how the Bills sort of fared yesterday, and really going back maybe a little bit to that Green Bay game where they weren't their best version probably of themselves, but like we want to put a panic meter, which we like to do on these types of shows. Panic meter, maybe like a level 1 through 10. What's your panic level right now with this Bills team? Keep in mind they're still 6-2. They're still first place in the AFC overall, first place in the division. They are 0-2 in the AFC East, but still tops of the division by virtue of win-loss record. On tap, we've got the 7-1 Vikings, and a loss Sunday could potentially move the Bills to third place in the AFC East. So what is your panic level right now with this Bills team? In comment section, I want to hear from you as well. What is your panic level maybe on a scale of 1 to 10 for this Bills team right now?
Looking before, taking back before injuries, it really isn't that high. It's a 4 right now for me, simply because, yes, 0-2 in the division. It's never great, but still in the lead in the division. And I keep seeing these comments about getting the first seed. A lot of people seem to put last year's loss on having to play on the road. I'm not going to get into that part of it, but the Bills right now are still first in the conference and have wins over 2, 3, and 4. They have wins over the other 3 division leaders right now: Baltimore, Kansas City, and who am I forgetting? Tennessee. Tennessee. They have the wins against all 3 division winners right now, teams they're going to be competing with. So obviously they're going to have to handle business and win at least 3 of these next 4 division games down the road. But in terms of long-term outlook, I'm really not concerned. Obviously we factor in injuries. Jordan Poyer's down. We don't really know the status of his elbow. The fact that he's not on IR yet leaves me a little optimistic that he'll come back in the near future. Matt Milano, I tweeted before the game this week when I saw this injury report that this might be a game where they just do load management. And maybe if, Matt Milano played the entire game last week, or the week before. So if this game's maybe not against the Jets, they play Matt Milano. If it's later in the year, maybe they play Matt Milano and he can play through that. So I'm not super concerned about that Matt Milano can't come back. And obviously, Josh Allen's the wild card in this. That changes the whole equation and when it comes to the panic meter. But looking at it, assuming Josh Allen is at some point healthy again, whether it's this week, next week, down the road, at a 4, just because, we'll get into why as we go into some of the numbers in this game. But in terms of going into the playoffs, I'm really not that concerned because still every team in the conference is still chasing Buffalo at this point.
Still chasing Buffalo. We got quite a wide range of answers here from the comments section. We've got Jaquan Norris comes in, says he's a 0. And then we go kind of the complete opposite way here with Ryan. Roberts says an 8. They need to win this game. Speaking of the Vikings, by chance of regular, always with some really, really good comments in the comment section, says he's at a 7. Dilly says 0-2 in the division is very concerning. And then we have a lot of folks like Roy and like Astro coming in kind of in that 4 to 5 range, like you mentioned. I'm probably with you. I'm probably more around a 4-ish or so. But it will come down to, it's not even really going to come down to, like, if Josh misses a game or 2, that's not really going to change my panic level, if that makes sense, because ultimately the goal is to have, like, he needs to be 100% healthy for the playoffs. And obviously we would want to have that number 1 seed. So if your panic level is qualified by you need the Bills to get that number 1 seed, I can understand why it would be higher than if your concern really is more of like just be in the dance at the end of the season. And if Josh Allen's 100% healthy, I'll take my chances with him against anybody on any field. Knowing the Bills have gone into places like Arrowhead and won multiple times. And obviously we're 13 seconds away from winning a third time in Arrowhead. So, and that was in the playoffs. So, I think I can understand why panic levels might be different depending on sort of what level of importance you're placing on getting that number 1 seed. I personally place a lot of importance on it, but I think things can change quickly, right? I mean, things change quickly. Like we were riding high 2 weeks ago going into that bye, and it was like number 1 seed is like all I'm worried about right now. But now I'm like, okay, we've got the 7-1 Vikings coming into town. Not sure what Josh's health is going to be. I don't want to dip to below first place in the division, let alone the AFC. So, yeah, like it's not, it's not objective for me to sit here and say it's a 0, but I can say that it's probably a 4. And we're going to talk about some of the things that went wrong in this game here in just a second. So good mix of comments. Got a lot of people talking about running the ball and Gabe Davis being overrated. So let's get into that specifically on what went wrong for the offense in this game against the Jets. Josh Allen had the 2 interceptions. Obviously was not one of his best games statistically. He was only 18 for 34 for 205 yards with the 2 picks. He did chip in 86 yards on the ground in the 2 touchdowns, which obviously kind of bolstered his overall total yardage and sort of contribution to the game. But obviously the 2 interceptions were not good. Pressured with 4. The Jets were able to get pressure with 4 and drop back into coverage. Seemed like Josh maybe was pressing the ball downfield a bit instead of taking some of the underneath. And obviously self-admittedly said after the game, quote, "It is hard to win when your quarterback plays like shit." Was sacked 5 times as well. So Ryan, general thoughts on the offense in this game and comment section. Let's hear from you as well. What are your thoughts on the offense? What went wrong? What would you have liked to see go differently? How much blame goes to Josh Allen? How much blame goes to Ken Dorsey and others in this game?
I do want to start out by saying, because I think sometimes we get so focused on what went wrong with the Bills, and, we should hold them to high standards. They're a team with Super Bowl aspirations, rightfully so. But, the Jets, to their credit, I sold them a little short coming into the week. I thought they had some, wins against lesser teams. They were kind of, feisty. But that defense the Jets have is legitimately good. They have
very good.
They have studs on all 3 levels of the defense. Quinnen Williams is getting up there in the Chris Jones tier of game wreckers. They have a really deep offensive line that rotates guys like the Bills. Sauce Gardner is at a rookie is already an all-pro caliber talent, which you don't see that often. And Jordan Whitehead is a guy who was a Pro Bowl caliber safety in the NFL. They have really good dudes on all 3 levels of that defense. And Robert Saleh is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. So I think it's important to recognize that the Bills went up against a really good defense. Not that that excuses anything that went wrong, but I mean, starting with Josh Allen, because, if Josh Allen doesn't play like that, the offense is in a much better spot. I see things, I think people say, we called it before in years past. We haven't seen it in a while, Sugar High Josh. And I think when things start to snowball sometimes with Josh Allen, we've seen this, and he's been able to pull himself out of it most of the time recently, but it really seemed like he was pressing. When things aren't easy, when there isn't an easy answer there, whether it's not having a safety blanket, like he had all those years with Cole Beasley, he presses, and it seemed like in this game he was pressing. And some, the first play where he just, whether he didn't see, Eric Turner said it well, he didn't see the safety there and forces the pass to Dawson Knox. Second play or second pick, miscommunication, but still you can't make that. That's a pass you can't make. It was a good coverage by Sauce Gardner that tricked him, but you still can't force that play. So it seemed like as this game went on and the Jets took away a lot of his easy answers, he pressed. And it's been 6 quarters of that now, going back to the Packers game. So it's been 6 quarters. So there's something that he's put on tape and Dorsey has put on tape, and we're going to get to Dorsey in a little bit, that teams are seeing and queuing in on. So it's now on the Bills' plate, on Josh's plate, on Dorsey's plate, to figure out what the counter is, right? Football is people seeing the tape, making adjustments, countering, and then countering the counter. So Josh, the offense, they have to find whatever the counter is to what teams are doing to them now.
Yeah, I agree. And, a couple of the other, notable things here, and this is something that you have been, I don't want to say overly vocal about, to not to try to put that negativity on you, but you have been one of the few people who have kind of been maybe less on the Gabe Davis hype train than others. And there's some comments in the comment section, right? And there's some good statistics that kind of back this up. Gabe Davis has the worst. Astro here says Gabe Davis is the worst catch percentage for wide receivers with at least 30 targets. I think you put this stat on Twitter as well. We need better production from pass catchers. There is a little bit of an element there of he does get thrown a lot of what I would call lower percentage chances to his defense, because he is, predominantly that guy that they do try to throw the ball deep. But there are plays that you look back in this game where you say you had 2 catchable balls in critical moments that he wasn't able to haul in. And he didn't haul them in. So while Gabe Davis can make those splash plays and really help this team out, the inconsistency possibly from him, and obviously he missed a little bit of time. I don't think he officially missed. I think he missed officially 1 game, if I'm not mistaken, with the ankle injury. But for the most part, he hasn't really missed any time this year. But that inconsistency has led to essentially Stephon Diggs being the focal point of this offense, and the rest of this group, including Dawson Knox, who they just paid a ton of money, finding a little bit of a struggle to get these guys the ball in an efficient manner. And so why don't you talk a little bit about Gabe Davis, your thoughts on him, and is he, because we were talking about before the season, maybe potentially giving him a Christian Kirk type contract to be the wide receiver 2 for the Bills. Is he the wide receiver 2 of the future for this team, or is this more of a case of maybe he's just going through a little slump and the Bills just kind of have to work their way out of it?
So I think Rockpile put out a really good tweet yesterday talking about how Gabe Davis hasn't really been able to flourish in going to a role where he's more of the outside receiver. And, I don't think a lot of people, and, Eric's done a good job pointing it out, but not a lot of people think of Gabe Davis as a slot receiver. And that's what he really was, not the Cole Beasley type slot, but, the power slot we see a lot in the NFL today. Just to give you some numbers, if you want to look at raw stats, last year, Gabe Davis only saw 378 slots out wide as one of the outside wide receivers. He's already seen 377 snaps outside this year through 9 weeks. To put it in percentages, his outside rate went from 65% to 95% from last year to this year. He is being used outside way more than he ever was. And we kind of wrote in that he was just going to be able to do that because we see him take the top off with all these goal balls. We see him do all this. And I think we got a little bit too high on the those 2-3 games down the stretch where he really did well. When reality is, it's a very useful skill that he has to be able to take the tops off defenses, but there's a reason why Emmanuel Sanders took so much of his snaps early on last year. He's a quality football player, but it's clear at least through 9 weeks, that he just isn't. Maybe can't handle is not the right word, but he's not suited to be that other outside wide receiver. He flourishes more from the spot. Maybe that was a blind spot for the Bills, in their offseason plans, that, they thought he was going to be able to just naturally bump out to the outside wide receiver and make that transition. Well, that's part of it. And like you said, catching has always been silently an issue. He's always had a catch rate around 55% for his career. So that's always been somewhat of an issue for him. And now he's seen this increased workload, and his efficiency just isn't going up. He's not a super efficient wide receiver right now. And, I think as fans, we sometimes get a little bit too overreactive because I see things in the chat calling him a bum, calling him. He's not. He's an NFL quality talent. He has a very useful skill, but I think he just doesn't fit that, what we think of as a wide receiver 2 role. And the issue is now the bus is moving. We got to figure out how to fix this thing on the fly. We got to figure we got to figure out how to fix it other wide receiver, whether it's him, whether it's bumping him inside and taking someone else outside. But we now are in the position we have to kind of figure out how to piece together that other wide receiver spot.
Yeah, and you mentioned his efficiency. You're right. I mean, his rookie year and his second year is right around 55, 56% catch percentage. He's down to 47% this year. His yards per reception's up. It's at a ridiculous 25.1, which is really not sustainable ultimately, obviously buoyed by that 98-yard touchdown he had against the Steelers. But still, like 25.1 yards per catch is not something that's sustainable in the NFL. He's kind of become that boomer bust guy that like drives you crazy in like things like fantasy football, right? Like a Deshaun Jackson of years past, where he's capable of making huge plays, but you also know he's capable of having duds. And like you look at his statistics this year, he's at 38 targets, so he's slightly ahead of his pace on targets, but not a ton from last year, right? He had 63 targets last year, 62 as a rookie, so he's really only on pace for about 10 or so more targets, 10 to 15 more targets this year, and that's without Emmanuel Sanders, without Cole Beasley. He's only got 18 receptions as well, so 35 receptions a piece his rookie year and his second year. He's really pretty much on pace for the same amount of receptions that he had his rookie year and his second year. Obviously, he's outpacing from a yardage standpoint. He's already at 451 yards, so he's likely to clear that 600-yard mark, which he hadn't done yet in his career. 599 his rookie year was his high, so he still hasn't cleared 600 yards yet on a season. Obviously, it's only his third year, but that efficiency, like you mentioned, is down. And I think it's tough because we look at how efficient a guy like Stephon Diggs is, and he's like the polar opposite from an efficiency standpoint of a guy like Gabe Davis. And maybe you think, well, those two things could work well together. But the problem is when that inefficient side of the equation is not producing big plays here and there in a game like yesterday where there wasn't a big play to be had, or I should say there was a big play to be had, but it was not made. That puts a lot of pressure on Stephon Diggs. And we haven't even really talked about Dawson Knox yet and that contract he got and his sort of absence from the offense, in yesterday's game and really kind of throughout the season. So that leads me into my next question is Ken Dorsey, right? A lot was made about Ken Dorsey in the offseason, first-time play caller, has a lot of support, obviously, in the building, support from Josh Allen directly. He's going through his ups and downs as a play caller. We see that. We saw from the video of him sort of collecting his papers and walking out after a job well done to the slamming of the nope. Like he is on his own roller coaster right now as a play caller this season. And obviously the Bills are still one of the better offenses in the league, but how does Ken Dorsey fit into this whole equation? Is there something he can be doing differently to maybe bring that efficiency up for a guy like Davis, bring Knox more into the mix? Is there something that can be done with this running game now that Nyheim Hines is in the mix? Obviously just brought him in, but what is Ken Dorsey's role in sort of bringing the Bills out of this sort of mini slump that they're in right now?
I think it's the point to remember. I think we thought Ken Dorsey was just going to slide in, and after those first two games, was just going to slide in and not have a bad game and be perfect the entire season. And I think it's important that he was always going to have ebbs and flows, right? Stephon Diggs talked about it in this press conference. There was always going to be a point where, he didn't have tape out, and he put tape out, and teams adjusted, and it's good. Like I said before, it's going to be on him to readjust to what teams are doing. But for me, one thing I would really like to see is pick a slot option and stick with it. Cole Beasley was that dude. Cole Beasley and his chemistry with Josh was something that was unmatched. It was a mind melt. It was like they could read each other's mind when plays broke down, when Josh was improvising. He just knew where to go. And even if you do it in practice, it's hard to recreate that unless you're doing that in the game. So find an option or two maybe, and stick with that, right? You're paying Dawson Knox all this money, and you phased him out of the offense. Allow him to, he's a problematic matchup for linebackers. He's big. He's a problematic matchup for slot corners. He's an athletic big guy. Factor him into the offense. Let him be the choice route guy. Same thing with Khalil Shakir. We see Isaiah McKenzie. I understand that I've been the loudest Isaiah McKenzie hater. But listen, and Bills Blitzkrieg, I know you're in the chat right now. We've had 5 years of Isaiah McKenzie trying to prove he can be a slot receiver. He is not. I know he had a good Patriots game. He's had flashes. He is not the slot receiver. And they need to stop trying to make that happen because it's not working. Khalil Shakir, I'm always the pump the brake guys on rookies. But he's looked good. He's looked good in given opportunities to play. He's got the skill set to maybe, I'm not going to call him Cole Beasley, but to do some Cole Beasley-esque things. Give him more than 9 reps. Or I think it was 9 snaps, right? It's pick an option or two for that slot and stick with them. Let him build chemistry. Let them build a feel with Josh Allen, and not rotating guys in and out, and give someone the bulk of those reps and let them get chemistry, that game flow with Josh Allen.
Yeah, and I think the Bills are in a tough spot with that, right? Because it's like, on one hand, you have seen flashes from Isaiah McKenzie, but I think the issue really for him, his whole career has been that just inconsistency, and not all of it's his fault, right? A lot of it is like the Bills trying to maybe put him in different positions and like try to use him as a real slot. And when in reality, his best moments are on plays like they did yesterday, where they did that sort of, it wasn't really a jet sweep, but it was more like a, like almost like an end around handoff they did to him, where he ran for 10 yards, right? On plays like that, he has been kind of at his best. And that's where he's been the most consistent in providing impact, I think. And not that he hasn't provided impact in spots here and there out of the slot, but where he provides, I think, the most impact and the most positive impact is on plays like that. And that's not a bad thing, right? As someone to have that role. And on the other hand, the Bills are in a dilemma, right? Because it's like, well, then do they go all in on trying to trust the key, like give Shakir the keys to the slot position as a rookie halfway through the season? We know McDermott has not always been so forthcoming with playing rookies, especially rookies that weren't drafted super high. And like, you can say what you want about Khalil Shakir and his talent, and we know he's talented, but like the fact of the matter is like, he just hasn't gotten the playing time on the field that to lead us to believe that the coaches really see him in that role full time yet. And that's not saying he won't get there, but they don't have him in that position yet. So the Bills are really in a jam right now in the slot position. And like that, although he wasn't necessarily putting up huge statistics, like Jamison Crowder was a steadying presence there, and we'll see if he comes back this year. So the Bills are in a tough spot there. I think the thing that they can really start doing is like, look, they got to get Dawson Knox going over the middle of the field in the short area. That's an area where you can create some of that intermediate sort of passing game where Josh has really been so good throughout his development, right? It's been on those 10 to 20 yard pass plays in that intermediate area. Those crossers, those mesh concepts, those flood concepts, like those are the things where, like, if they can get Dawson Knox going there and get him back sort of like on track, I think that could really open up some things. And this is where Ken Dorsey kind of has to get creative and figure out how he can get Knox more involved in the game plan. Because if you don't have a guy, whether it's McKenzie or Shakir, that you can really trust in the slot, you still need to have someone in the short area other than Diggs that you can get the ball to. And that's got to be Knox. With the money you gave him, you're pretty much saying like he should be a primary contributor to this team. And he just hasn't been yet. So we will see what happens there. Any final thoughts on the offense before we get to some thoughts on what went wrong for the defense in this game?
Eric Turner's been on the train, even when the Bills were playing well, that the passing concept the Bills are doing have been simple. And I think that may have been the case in this game when you have a great coach like Robert Saleh, who's seen a lot of things, right? Those San Francisco defenses were menaces, and now he's building the same thing there. So I think that's part of it. And also, I think another big part of it, just one thing I want to touch on before we move on, is just the offensive line is another big role, takes a big role in it. And, the Bills have built the defensive line around a lot of B+ talents and not a whole lot of A+, which is fine. It's done well. The funny thing about the Bills offensive line is they'll look good for 4, 5, 6 game stretches, and then they'll have a game like the Jets where they get their asses kicked. And it's hard to scheme against just having, getting your butt kicked by guys like Quinnen Williams and John Franklin Myers and the guys they have on that defensive line. But, I know Judge has been the biggest proponent of this. I would love to see them get back to some heavier sets, get Reggie Gilliam back on the field, get, force teams to bring a linebacker on the field, that's a way you can get Dawson Knox involved. And even Quinn Morris, who's looked good. They haven't had production out of any of their tight ends right now. So I would love to see, get back to, the offense looked fun and creative when Reggie Gilliam's on the field, when it's been looked creative and fun when Quinn Morris is on the field. I would love to see them get back to some of those heavier sets because it will help them pass project when you're having games like the Jets where you just can't block anyone. If you can drop in, an extra offensive lineman or an extra blocker, however that looks. And, that's something I would like to see. And, hopefully, as, Dorsey heads back to the film room this week, that's something we see more of going forward because, I won't step on your guys' toes for your Vikings coverage later in the week, but the Vikings have another really good defensive line, including a fan favorite coming back in Harrison Phillips.
Yeah, they sure do. We'll keep, before we move on to the defense, a couple quick positives, though, I will say. I thought James Cook in limited action looked pretty solid. He's definitely been playing with a little bit more confidence in out of the bye week. You saw it in the Green Bay game. You saw it a little bit yesterday. He's still not getting a ton of volume, but, he did have 4 carries and 2 catches in this game. So he touched the ball 6 times, ended up producing a little over 30 yards on those 6 touches. So I like what we've seen a little bit out of James Cook coming out of the bye week, but now it raises the question of sort of what they're going to do with Nyheim Hines. They saw him try to use him going down the sideline on that one play, but it'll be interesting to see how the Bills kind of stack the deck with this running back group, and then with Nyheim Hines having another week of practice under his belt. So on to the defense. What went wrong for the defense? Run fits, run blitz, tackling, and effectiveness. Jets were really able to kind of move the ball at will on the ground for the most part, had nearly 200 yards rushing on this game. This was really sort of amplified by that final drive where they kind of milked the clock down to the 2-minute warning, just under the 2-minute warning with all those runs. The Bills did keep them out of the end zone. Matt Milano and Jordan Poyer being absent, is that the explanation? Jaquan Johnson, we were talking about it a lot in the Cover One group chat today, and it was really pretty evident to mostly everyone who watched that game was not him, as like people like to say it these days. It's, I guess, on my lingo, but yeah, he was not good. And that was really, to me, highlighted by one of the very last plays of the game that the Jets had, where Zach Wilson had the ball and he just kind of didn't really come up and hit Zach Wilson. He kind of let Zach Wilson hit him and kind of fall forward. It was just a little weird to me. And as Asher says here, took so many bad angles. And I know Eric's cooking up some film room on that to break that all down. But this is now 2 games in a row where the Bills' run defense has not looked great. Matt Milano obviously missed this game. Jordan Poyer's missed the last 2. How much reliance does this Bills defense have on those 2 guys in just setting the tone? And how much of a struggle has it been for this defensive line, really, the last 2 games? Obviously, Von Miller had the one big sack, but like talking more so against defending the run, like it's been a struggle for this group the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to struggle anytime you lose a guy who was an all-pro this year or all-pro last year and a guy in Matt Milano who now national media outlets are talking about him. It could be an all-pro guy this year. That's obviously going to have a huge impact on the run, but so much of the run game is predicated on defensive line doing their job. And Jordan Phillips had a terrible game on Sunday against the run. Greg Rousseau, who is probably their best run defender, missed most of the second half of the game. That's massive when it comes to it. And, when the defensive line doesn't do their job, when they're letting guys get to the second levels, that's going to have a huge impact on the success in the run game. So that's part of it. But, I think it is important to remember that they still only held them to 20 points. And, not that stopping the run doesn't matter, because it absolutely does. It allowed them to bleed the clock, limit the amount of time Josh Allen was on the field, which is what the Packers did a lot of, in the last week before. But, when it got down to the red zone, they held them to field goals. They gave them a chance to win the game with 1:40 left. My concern going forward, if you ask me what I'm more concerned about, the offense or the defense, it's the offense, because you got to be able to score points when you have Josh Allen as your quarterback. But, I think obviously you're going to struggle when you miss guys like Matt Milano, but it really comes to the defensive line that just didn't show up in multiple facets on Sunday.
Yeah, while the Jets defensive line was showing up, the Bills defensive line did not. And maybe we've been a little bit spoiled in kind of all this chatter and really on the field, the Bills having the best offense and best defense, which is just super rare to begin with. So the defense having a couple down games against the run, maybe it's a bit of an overreaction, but you're right. I do think missing those guys and the defensive line just really didn't play exceptionally well at all yesterday. By Chance comes in with the super chat here. And thanks, By Chance, for the chat. We appreciate it. The fan base refuses to criticize Bean, but the use of early picks on guys like Ford, Moss, Epinesa, Basham, and Bernard are starting to pile up. And in early picks here, I think By Chance is talking about day 1 and day 2 picks, so rounds 1 through 3. So you see the picks here with Moss. Guys like Moss who have been traded, Epinesa, 2nd rounder, Basham, a 2nd rounder, Bernard, a 3rd rounder, starting to pile up. Contributions from these guys maybe haven't been where we generally hope they would be. Didn't think Epinesa had a great game yesterday either. Bernard was okay, I thought. I think there was a lot of people criticizing Terrell Bernard yesterday, but I think that for the most part, he was playing a physical brand. I think a lot of the tackling issues and sort of the angle issues were more of a Jaquan Johnson issue than they were.
I don't think Bernard was a hindrance as much as I think Bernard. I think he was a net nothing. I think he was a net 0, whereas Jaquan Johnson and Jordan Phillips and AJ Epinesa were net negatives in the game.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Wonder is wondering, has Epinesa ever had a good game? He had one good game, I think.
Miami last year.
Miami, yes.
Where he had like 7 pressures, then he never was seen again.
Yeah, he's never seen again. Outside of Von Miller's, strip sack, the Bills really did get worked in this run game, and they really didn't put pressure on Zach Wilson with 4, right? Which is what we talked about in the pregame, was like Zach Wilson really not a good quarterback under pressure, an under 20% completion percentage under pressure this year, 5 interceptions. And the Bills the Bills really didn't get a ton of pressure on Zach Wilson outside of that one Von Miller play. I would have liked to maybe see the Bills dial up a little bit more pressure. I know it goes against their sort of MO because they're not a blitz heavy team, but knowing how important things like analytics are to Sean McDermott, and it was a little surprising to not see them play the statistics a bit and send a little bit more heat Zach Wilson's way, especially as he seemed to be locking in on the other Wilson, Garrett Wilson, who had a very nice game. That's now 2 good games in a row for him. But what did you make of the pressure or the lack of, I guess, conviction or decision for the Bills to kind of heat up Zach Wilson with bringing extra guys?
It's funny you say that because I had that in my notes. I had written down that, I think Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott were a little inflexible in this game. That, again, I literally had the same thing. I think we read each other's minds on that one, that Zach Wilson this year has been the absolute worst quarterback in the NFL against the blitz. Like we're not talking 32 of 32. We're talking like 64. How many ever quarterbacks have played this year? 40 out of 40. He's been the worst quarterback by a lot against the blitz, and especially in a game where you have guys out that, it's one thing to play that way when you have Trey White and Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer back there who can sit back there, and if your defensive line doesn't necessarily get home right away, can defend for 4 or 5 seconds. When you don't have those guys and you aren't having a great day of pass rushing, which it seems like they only had 7 pressures in this game, that's where maybe you need to be a little more flexible. Send Terrell Bernard right now. The one thing we know coming out of the draft is that he's a twitchy guy, and that if anything he can do, he can come downhill. Would have loved to have seen them send Terrell Bernard on some blitzes. Would have loved to see them. Damar Hamlin is a hammer out there. Damar Hamlin loves to hit dudes. Would have loved to have seen them. I forgot what quarter it was, but the stop he had on that Zach Wilson bootleg was beautiful. Damar Hamlin loves to come down and hit dudes. Send Damar Hamlin on some blitzes. Send a Teron Johnson blitz. Hell, send a Tremaine Edmonds blitz. I would have loved to have seen them exploit that, especially with just how injured, their back end were, and try to roll the dice and take some gambles. And I know their offense wasn't looking great, but trust your offense that if you do mess up, that they can go back and get you the points. And at least if you do, you're putting your offense back on the field, and you're putting your offense back in the field and controlling the time of possession a little bit. So I absolutely agree with you there. I would have loved to see a little bit more flexibility in the philosophy there.
I would have liked to see some flexibility, but we know the Bills really haven't done that much, right? I mean, I think you can go to like a handful of games, like the Seattle game from a couple years ago, where they used AJ Klein a bit as a blitzer and things like that. But those types of games are really the only ones that kind of stand out. Like there's not a ton of differentiation from game to game from this Bills defense, which, look, by the way, has worked. I'm not saying it hasn't worked. And up until really this game, like the Bills were getting pressure with 4 in almost every game they played. And that's why this defense has been so good, because they've been able to sit back and let that front 4 do the job. Bills Blitzkrieg here comes in with a super chat. Thank you for that. Zach Wilson had over 100 passer rating yesterday, which is frankly embarrassing, even with injuries. Yeah, I mean, and
it felt like those drought era games. It felt like, you ever remember those games, the drought, where it's like, oh, sweet, we get to play Jason Campbell this week. Oh, sweet, we get to play the Matt Hasselbeck Titans. And then Jason Campbell goes on to look like Tom Brady against you. That's what it felt like. It felt like those drought era games where you get excited to play a bad quarterback, and then they light you up anyways.
I know. And you mentioned Damar Hamlin, and speaking of just taking a little bit of a some positives away from the defensive performance. I mean, I think Damar Hamlin is a guy that has a future on this team. Question mark about what Jordan Poyer's future might be with this team. Hopefully Micah Hyde can come back from whatever, from that injury he's dealing with the neck, but we don't know for sure if he can. And though I do think Damar Hamlin is better suited to play the quote Jordan Poyer role, if you will, on the defense, I would not be opposed to going into, a 2023 situation where it's either, Poyer and Hamlin, or Hyde and Hamlin, and like kind of allowing Hamlin to slide into that safety role if the Bills do decide to either not extend Jordan Poyer, which they haven't yet, or if Micah Hyde does not come back. The scariest proposition to me would be if neither of those guys are back and we have to figure out what's going on with the safety position. Dean Marlowe was traded for last week, and there's a lot of chatter from Cover One and from others that they want to see Dean Marlowe get in the mix and kind of possibly take that Jaquan Johnson role. So we'll see what happens in practice this week. It's going to be a tall order against the Vikings upcoming. I agree with you, and this is why we made the point. I would have liked to see a little bit more pressure. Garrett Wilson was really the only guy that did anything of significance in that, in that Jets passing game. I mean, CJ Uzama had 3 catches, but only for 16 yards. I mean, Garrett Wilson was their passing offense. So I would have taken my chances, right? I would have taken my chances, maybe had a bracket on Garrett Wilson in the back end and just taking my chances sending a little bit more heat, but the Bills obviously did not do that. And obviously hindsight is 2020. So, final segment of the night here. The blueprint to beat the Bills is what Judge titled this as he was coming up with the show notes. The blueprint to beat the Bills is out there now. But the good news is it's really hard to execute and you need the right personnel, right? You blitz, or you send forward, you drop 7 into zone. You put your number 1 corner on Gabe Davis. You bracket Stephon Diggs. You try to get pressure with 4 and accept the minimal damage that the Bills really can inflict to you on the ground until they show you otherwise. And you test Josh Allen's patience, right? And so that's what happened in this game. And that's kind of what happened in the second half of that Packers game, although the Bills were winning. And then on the flip side, against the Bills defense, running the ball has clearly been working for teams, sticking to the run. Short, quick passing game has worked lately, and chewing clock and limiting the Bills' possessions on offense. Now, it's obviously all easier said than done, but this is where it comes down to guys like Ken Dorsey and even a guy like Leslie Frazier, who is a veteran, see what the Bills can do to throw a few more wrinkles into their game plans every week. And I'm mainly looking at Ken Dorsey in this situation. Is this something that teams will look at and say, like, okay, we can replicate this? Or do you feel like that this is just one of those situations where the Jets just had the horses on defense and just played a great game in combination with the Bills making so many mistakes for this to really be a concern against this team going forward?
I feel like it's super important to note that getting pressure with 4 has been the blueprint to beat any quarterback in the history of football. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers. If you get pressure with 4, you're going to beat just about any quarterback especially interior pressure, which is what the Jets got a lot of on Sunday. Quinnen Williams really did a number on the interior Bills offensive line. But I think he's right on point when it comes to talking about testing Allen's patience with the dink and dunks, because last year, once again, not to keep harping on this, but last year, I think the perfect example of the Bills beating that was that week 16 game against the Patriots last year, which I think is the best example of that, where the Bills, he was just throwing it 5 yards to Isaiah McKenzie, to Devin Singletary as teams dropped out in the deep zone, and they took it, turned around, and ran 7 yards upfield. And again, to keep harping on it, the issue is they just haven't had that guy that you can, that's been that safety blanket, that whether it's a trust issue, whether it's a scheme issue, that they've had that option. So if you're going to play, Josh Allen sees some of the highest rates of cover 2 in football right now. That's the way football is played right now for them. Every team besides a couple play that cover 2 shell, especially even teams that don't tend to on Josh Allen. They got to find an option underneath when teams do that. And in the last 6 quarters of football, they just haven't had that. So until, the Bills find that's going to be the blueprint. Teams are going to keep doing this until the Bills fix it. And, I think one of the things we can lean on, even though it's a new offensive coordinator, every time a team or teams have thought they've come up with a blueprint for Josh Allen and it's worked for half a game, 2 games, 3 games. We saw it last year for a little bit. Something clicks and it's back off to the races. So we have a history of when teams adjust against the Bills, against Josh Allen adjusting. So I'm confident, and that's why my panic level still, unless we get some terrible news tomorrow, my panic level still pretty low, because I think inevitably Josh Allen is too good of a player, is too talented of an offense for teams to do this for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I also would like to see the Bills now, like again with Nyheim Hines back in the fold now.
We didn't even talk about him yet today.
I mean, I'd like to see the Bills force the defense's hand a little bit more against light boxes. I'd like to see the Bills show some of that success that they've had in the running game against light boxes, like they did early in the game against Green Bay and even against Kansas City. Going back to that game, like the Bills have had moments this season where they've run the ball like really well with Devin Singletary, and like no teams have adjusted and kind of hasn't gone that well in the second half. And I'm not saying that they need to become a running team, because that's not what I'm saying. I just think that having the threat of the run and showing that it's as good as actually running the ball in a lot of cases. And so
that formation they run where they line up Hart outside of Dawson Knox has been, I know it didn't work as much in the first game, but that first game they started doing against Packers was absolute money. I would love to see them getting back to doing some of that kind of stuff. Yep,
I agree. And so I'd like to see a little bit more of that. And I do think that if things start, if Dorsey starts getting Knox a little bit more involved over the middle of the field, you could see things maybe start loosening up a bit as well. And so, look, it's all there for the Bills. Like they have the personnel, they have, I think, a good enough offensive line for this to work. And I think it's just like one of those situations where we look back probably on this 2022 season, I hope, and say just kind of a couple interesting games they had there. Like when we look back at that Jacksonville game from a year ago, or like the Steelers game from week 1, and we say like that was just a weird game, or it was just a bad game for this team. And then you're like, that's not even the same team we saw like weeks later, right? Like it's amazing to think that team that lost to the Jaguars last year was also the team that scored 7 straight touchdowns against the Patriots in that wild card game. So like, it's just wild how things can change so quickly in this league. And obviously the most important thing right now is really the well wishes for not just Josh Allen, but all the guys that are hurt, but obviously especially Josh Allen in that elbow. And we'll see by Wednesday, hopefully, what the prognosis will be on that. So, Ryan, with that, we're coming up to the hour mark here, end of the show. Any parting thoughts from you before we head out of here tonight and watch the second half of this Ravens Saints game?
I'm just going to keep telling people what I've been telling people on Twitter. Now, this all goes out the window if we get bad news on Josh tomorrow, but at least for tonight, take a deep breath, relax. The Bills are 6-2. The Bills are number 1 in the conference. The Bills are number 1 in the division. They were never going to go 18-0. They were or 17-0 or 16-1. There's always going to be bumps in the road during an NFL season. And even though we have expectations through the moon, even the best teams have ugly losses. Our 2 ugly losses this year are by a total of 6 points to teams that are combined 12-6 right now. So it's guys are good. Poyer hopefully will come back. Milano's going to come back, and knocking on wood, at some point at least, we'll get Josh back. So take a deep breath. The Bills are still in a fine spot. The Super Bowl parade is still on. That's I don't have anything else to end it on, but I'm trying to be zen. I'm trying to exude zen to the
Exude the zen. We got our venting out tonight. We got our criticisms out tonight. It's okay to criticize the team and things when things don't go well. That's what we do, right? We tend to kind of go that way when things go badly after a loss. We tend to go the other way when things go well after a win. But obviously, we are going to put this game in the rear view mirror now officially and look forward to hopefully getting good news on Josh Allen and turning our attention to a very sort of marquee game, probably the marquee game on the NFL slate this upcoming weekend with the Vikings. Judge and I will be here for you all pregame on Sunday for the Bills Vikings, hopefully previewing a Josh Allen versus Kirk Cousins matchup for you. But we do appreciate you all joining us tonight in the comment section. We know it's always a little bit tougher to come into these shows when the Bills have lost, especially to a Jets team. My freaking neighbor, one of my good friends, is a Jets fan. Of course, I was going out getting my mail today. Happened to be when he was driving home from work, and he let out a nice like little JETS Jets as he was driving by. I didn't appreciate that, but it was all in good fun. And look,
HOA.
Yeah, I might have to report that to the HOA, but look, at the end of the day, the Bills are still 6-2, like you said, atop the AFC. Let's try to keep our minds positive here going forward. Wishing for positive news for Josh and Ryan. Thank you, of course, for filling in tonight in comment section. Thank you, as always, for making your voice heard. And if you weren't able to watch this show live, you can watch it on replay or through podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any other major podcasting platform. So until next time, hopefully with Josh Allen, we always end it with a Go Bills.
Go Bills, baby.
Are we having fun yet?